belly fat. How many YouTube videos have you seen on belly fat? Get rid of your belly fat with no diet, no exercise. Let me just ask you, have you ever tried that? If you did it work? YouTube and other social media, they're flooded with videos and other content promising speedy solutions to common problems. Here are a couple of examples. One was the channel Brightside. It had a video titled, How to Lose Belly Fat in One Night with This Diet. 39 million views. The second one, How I Lost Belly Fat in 7 days. No strict diet, no workout, 35 million views. Now, what were the results? Well, the results depend on who you are. If you're one of those, 70 million who viewed one of these videos, different issue. If you're the channel content creator, you got a lot of views, and maybe that was the only result you were looking for. But let's get back to those 70 million viewers. And if you're wondering where I got 70 million, again, I just added the two. Pardon me for going down that bunny hole. You know me, I tend to focus on details. And I'm just saying, look, maybe there was overlap for 5 million, and let's just cut it down to 70 million. But let's conservatively say it was 70 million. Do you think those 70 million viewers got what they wanted, the result they wanted? Do you think they're walking around with six packs, washboard abs? Oh, come on. It takes going to the comments section, and you'll see exactly what the reality was behind that advice. It didn't work. Now, I don't want to rain on the parade, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that losing belly fat is impossible. In fact, just the opposite. I'm not even skeptical or naive enough to think that you can't make it fast, pardon the air quotes, but plenty of people have done that, and you can too. But we need to start from the beginning. First of all, let's define what you mean by fast. One day is a stretch, but in a couple of weeks, you really might start seeing some positive progress. Like a lot of things in life, there's no magical solution to the problem. Magic doesn't work. But there is a solution that can help you get rid of your belly fat, especially the more dangerous visceral fat. Now, let's start transitioning into and talking about why would we be talking about belly fat anyway? We're not a channel that looks at self-image or looking good, although we've helped many hundreds, maybe thousands by now, people lose huge amounts of weight. And in fact, when you look at our viewers, when they come in as patients, most of them say, yep, I've lost 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 50 pounds. And yep, I did it by the content on your channel. So we are helping people lose weight. But it's not, for us, it's not quite so much about looking good. We realize that's very important. But we're talking about health. Let's go back to that first things first. Why does the body even store fat in the first place? And let's make the point that not all belly fat is created equal. There are two main types, and we're going to get geeky for just a few minutes, not very long, but this is important information. The two types are technically called subcutaneous and visceral. Subcutaneous means what it sounds like. Sub, under, cutaneous, the skin. So it's the stuff under your skin. It's the saddlebags, the love handles, that padding under your skin. Now, what's the other stuff? Visceral? What does that mean? Again, another technical jargon word, but it means fat inside your belly. deep inside your belly, around your organs. Now, most people watching this channel have seen enough to know what I'm talking about. It's fat surrounding essential organs like the liver, the pancreas, and kidneys. And there's also fat inside the liver, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now, the body has to have a way to store energy, and that is the central role of fat. But there's a lot more to it than that. Fat is not an inert, harmless energy storage tissue. It does store energy, but it's a metabolic tissue, an endocrine tissue. What does endocrine mean? It makes hormones. It makes stuff that can make you very, very sick. Let me put it this way. Your body fat could be costing you much more than just compliments and self-image. I'm not saying that those are not important, but your body fat could be causing undiagnosed prediabetes, high blood pressure, strokes, kidney disease, brain dysfunction, dementia, Parkinson's disease. And if you're too young to think any of those might impact you, also erectile dysfunction. Now, how does all that happen? If you look at all of this from the fat cells point of view, we begin to get a very different picture. So let's go down deep inside the body and look at the secret life of a fat cell. When a healthy person eats, fat cells take in extra glucose. They need to store that glucose for energy needs between meals. But what happens when our fat cell has a full tank? The tank is full. It cannot hold more energy. It begins to say to the body, look, I'm full. I can't take any more glucose from the bloodstream. How does it do that? It becomes resistant to insulin. Remember that term, insulin resistance. What happens when our fat cells are full and just start resisting that insulin? Remember, for some reason, it seems that our visceral fat cells, those deep belly fat cells, are more prone to this. The primary purpose of insulin is to help get glucose out of the bloodstream where it can do damage and into those fat cells, into liver cells, into muscle cells where it is safe, relatively speaking, at least on an acute basis. But let's go back and talk about our friend the fat cell. When that fat cell's full of glucose, it's trying to turn it into fat, and it becomes insulin resistant. It's saying, I can't take any more. So insulin resistance means the fat cells are full of glucose and fat. It also means pre-diabetic or even diabetic. Type 2 diabetes, by the way, not type 1. Now, when we eat foods that are high in sugar, refined carbs, our blood sugars spike. Our brain recognizes that blood sugar is spiking and it says, whoa, let's see if we can pull this blood sugar down, because high sugar in the blood is dangerous acutely, immediately. So it sends instructions to our pancreas saying, let's release some insulin to help those fat cells, those muscle cells, those liver cells absorb this excess glucose for energy later on. Again, though, when there's that constant influx of high sugar foods, high carb foods, high processed carbs, our cells become resistant to insulin. Also, there's a couple of other things that make this worse. The biggest one is getting older. Growing old ain't for sissies. And genetics matters too. Anyhow, that excess sugar gets converted into fat, ending up often as visceral fat, fat around those organs, the kidneys, the liver, the pancreas. So we start getting into a double whammy, a vicious spiral. Too much blood sugar, you get swelling of those insulin cells. Swelling of those insulin cells causes insulin resistance. Insulin resistance causes your blood sugar to go even higher. Higher blood sugar, higher fat, higher insulin resistance, higher blood sugar. Again, this vicious spiral. And guess what's happening inside all of that? Again, those belly fat cells continue to get stuffed tighter and tighter. And they continue to make those hormones more and more and more. Speaking of hormones, there's a lot more hormones involved in this than just insulin. Cortisol, for example, it's our stress hormone. It can trigger the storage of visceral fat. When we're stressed, our bodies think we need extra energy for a potential fight or flight situation. And where does it store that energy? Yep, you probably guessed it, in belly fat. Not subcutaneous fat, but that dangerous visceral stuff. A couple of other hormones, leptin and ghrelin. Most people have heard of those. Leptin says, hey, I'm satisfied. I don't need to eat more. And ghrelin says the opposite. No, we're hungry. Guess what? Have you heard about sleep and insulin resistance? When we have a bad night of sleep, leptin levels drop and ghrelin levels increase, making us hungrier and hungrier. In fact, it is the critical ingredient in the recipe for those late night snacks and those after a bad night of sleep, gorging all day snacks. That's what's going on. It's these hormones. So why should we be concerned about belly fat anyway? Beyond our looks, our body image, again, it's that visceral fat we discussed. It's more than just extra padding. It's metabolically active tissue. It kills us. It makes us very, very sick. It disables us. It can make us blind. It can take us into kidney failure. So, where does inflammation come in all this? That creates inflammation as well. And the inflammation is in between the insulin resistance and the death, disease, and disability. So inflammation is linked to a range of health issues, including insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke. So having too much belly fat can mess with our cholesterol levels too. For those of you who are very worried about cholesterol, you're talking to your doctor, you haven't heard any of the things that we talk about on our channel, and you don't know the difference between, quote, metabolic disease and cholesterol. Guess what causes cholesterol to go up? Too much belly fat. So those of you that have fatty liver, or you know someone with fatty liver, yep, same thing. So again, this is not just about fitting into those skinny jeans. It's about keeping our bodies healthy from the inside out. Before we move to the best exercise to lose belly fat, what is the key that unlocks our ability to have adequate exercise? Now, if you've watched this channel before, you may already be guessing it. Insulin. Now, wait a minute. Insulin takes us the other direction, right? No, we're talking about insulin sensitivity, having a healthy relationship with insulin. In other words, keeping those body fat cells happy, going back into that secret life of the fat cell and keeping that cell not too stuffed with body fat. Be careful with carbs. Stay away from ultra-processed foods. Eat to the glucometer. And if you haven't heard that before, ask us a little bit later in the Q&A what that means. Find out what food is best for you. And it's going to keep you going the most and giving you the most out of your exercise, whatever exercise you choose to do. Finally, let's get rid of that dangerous visceral belly fat. Jesus, Are you ready to talk about that exercise?
So, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Brewer. Hi, everyone. Just tell us the exercise already, right? That's why we're here. And as you know, we kind of want to give you some context and prepare so you can understand the answer and see some nuance regarding that. I'm gonna go back to that slide in a moment, but let's go to the answer. Drum roll, please. Just high intensity interval training. There is plenty of evidence. We are sharing some of that with you today. And if you're not familiar with high intensity interval training, it's a form of exercise that came from cardio, but established a different protocol that evaluates heart rate, intensity, and it has shown to have multiple benefits on the way your muscle works. Muscles become a bypass for all those insulin receptors, so you can start using glucose and especially fat as energy. So we have a couple of studies, two studies that I want to share with you regarding high intensity interval training. This one is a meta analysis, which is a big study evaluating multiple research papers on this field. This included about 617 subjects. And the studies went from 4 weeks to 6 months of interventions doing high intensity interval training, or HIIT, as I will call it from now on. And they saw that HIIT has the potential to reduce both abdominal, which is what Dr. Brewer referred as subcutaneous fat, by 19%. But I think the biggest benefit of HIIT will be seen on the next number. Visceral fat was reduced about 24%. And I'm going to make a plug real quick in here. Next month, we're having Dr. Sean O'Mara as a guest, and we're going to talk more and more about visceral fat and what the risk is involved with that. The best way to get that hit, at least according to this study, was running. It showed that running was better than cycling. But I know there are challenges regarding that, especially if you're having troubles with your back or your knees. But there's a good side of this. There is a version that is called ReHIT, which is reduced hit, and it seems that even low intensity intervals, which is not exactly the same as ReHIT. ReHIT is high intensity, a small amount of time, but even low intensity exercise had some benefit. Not as much as HIT, but it did. And it was better when you were able to reach 90% of your heart rate. But I know that's a challenge. 90% of your heart rate, you can calculate uh, that by putting 220 minus your age. And to that, you will have to take the 90% out of that number that you came from, that you come up with. Uh, Downside from this specific study, this was done on mostly young people, less than 40 years. So if you are over 40 years old, you're going to say, well, does that even apply to me? Well, there's another study that was done in older people, and they put a twist on this. They evaluated not just HIT, but also L-citrulline supplementation, which is another big supplement that is very popular on YouTube. And this is what they found out. They evaluated 91 subjects with a mean age around 81 years old. They did 12 weeks of HIT with or without L-citrulline supplementation. And the way they did it was with an elliptical trainer, 20 minutes of HIT, once or twice a week. This is the way this HIT was developed. 30-second of sprints of a high intensity. High intensity was defined whenever you reach your heart rate between 80 to 85% of your maximum heart rate, that the one that we talked about, alternating with 90 seconds at a moderate intensity, which is getting your heart rate to no more than 65% of your maximum, and a 5-minute cool down. Those who did this regime and combine it with L-citrulline saw a decrease of 2.6 centimeters at their waist size, and they lost about 1.04% body fat. That's measured with a DEXA scan. But they also saw something really interesting, which was the fat tissue itself was expressing less hormones. So it was starting to progress to a moment where fat was not stimulating or causing more weight gain. The ones who did only HIIT, no L-citrulline supplementation, they saw a reduction of 2.2% of waist size. Now, was this because 12 weeks was not enough? Was this because this was older population? Those are questions to be answered. Yet there's evidence that this is getting benefits, specifically to belly fat, which is our main topic for today. There were other benefits to discuss in this study, and we can do that maybe on another date. But in regards to belly fat, HIIT seems like a really good option. Now, I'm sorry to burst the bubble, but there's an old saying. Well, I don't know how old that saying is actually, but the whole idea, and I think this is accurate. If you want to lose your belly fat, do not worry that much about the exercise. Worry about what you eat. In other words, your belly fat will disappear with your diet, not so much with exercise. And we see that HIIT has benefits, but if you're doing HIIT and not doing the eating part first, you might hit a wall and you might be frustrated and say, well, Dr. Brewer and Dr. Vega told me to do HIIT. I'm doing that. I'm not losing any weight. Well, first things first. In this study, 50 subjects with an average age of 52 years old were included on a research to compare the benefits of low carb, high fat diet versus low fat diet for specifically, yes, weight loss, but also belly fat. Low carb was defined as 5% of carbs or calories coming from carbs, 65% coming from fat. And the low fat diet was described as 63% of calories coming from carbs, up to 23% coming from protein, and 25% from fat. And they follow up this group of people for 15 weeks. The results? Those who were on a low carb, high fat diet lost about 15.6% of belly fat and about 18% of visceral fat. Those who were on a low fat diet, they did had some improvements as well. They lost 8% of belly fat and about 5% of visceral fat. Now, I'm not hitting on low fat diets, and I don't even think that the low carb worked because of the high fat percentage. I just think both of those diets work because reduction of carbs at some level. I know 63% is far from a low carb diet, but if you compare that to the standard American diet, that's a big change. So main conclusions that I want to bring out to this conversation are: exercise is important, yes, especially if you're doing a HIIT training, HIIT, but start with what you're eating. What I'm gonna quote Dr. Brewer on this one. I'm sorry for stealing your thunder, Dr. Brewer.
I'm used to it.
Whatever you choose for dinner can trump anything that we recommend for you. Any remarks about this, Dr. Brewer?
No, it's very true. We're getting a lot of traffic about, well, does walking work? No, walking's the best. No, how about a Concept 2 rower? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. I think the criteria for getting HIT type of training and re-HIT is much broader than we think. You're going to get a lot of debate over, no, mine's the best. And we may get into the six blind men and the elephant again, but that's the only comment I'll make for now.
And I will apologize, and I'll did state on a couple of slides that I prepared, and I didn't move them. I was moving them on my other screen, so I can see them. But here's the evidence that we talked about the elliptical, and you can pause the video later on and read it a little bit more. And this is the evidence on the diet interventions. Again, we have a lot of evidence on low carb diet specifically. Any type of low carb diet that you want to do, some might work for you, some might work for other people. We're having a guest next week to talk about low carb diet. And I'm sorry that it is not maybe the answer that a lot of new folks on the channel might have expected about, oh, these guys might have the magical solution to this. No surprise, it's what you eat and how you move. But this goes way beyond of the standard recommendation of eat less and move more. It's not about that. It's about eating smart in a smart way and exercising in a smart way, doing what works best. Yeah, Dr. Burr?
In some ways, we do have magic because this stuff will work magic with your body. But again, you gotta do the work. You gotta pay attention. As you said, there's a lot of diets. We had Robert Lustig on for one of the recent YouTube lives. It was a pre-recorded interview with him. We've got other components of that interview that we'll be providing later on, but he's from a very similar place that we are in terms of diets. There's one diet that doesn't work, but most of the others do, ranging all the way from vegan to carnivore and everything in between, except the standard American diet, piling on a bunch of highly processed carbs and a lot of fats at the same time. That doesn't work. Same thing with exercise. There's a bunch of different exercises that are going to work. As you saw in the evidence, they even used ellipticals. And I hear people talk about, oh, no, you can't use an elliptical. I just can't get there with it. Well, they did. And you can. It's not so much which type of exercise, just like it's not so much where you get your macronutrients in the diet space. It's what you do with it. And again, you got to get those criteria. You got to get your pulse up. And it's also a thing of where you are right now. We've got a lot of folks who really haven't even done much walking on a flat surface, mall walking. If you haven't done that, that's a great place to start. On the other hand, we've got a bunch of people like Sean O'Mara who are doing significant deadlifts, 180 pounds or more. We've got people who are doing significant hill sprints. Again, both of these things can have a huge impact on your metabolism.
And before we wrap it up and go to the next part of today's show, I want to give you two examples, and let's see if you fit on any of those categories. If you're dealing with belly fat, you might be a thin person has some belly, which is my case. I do have some belly. I'm working on that. But if you don't have a DEXA scan or even MRI, as Dr. Sean O'Mara advises to get, and you rely on exercise, you might be able to get that belly fat out, but you're missing your visceral fat. And that's important. And you want to make sure that you don't have that much of that. That's what this type of people are called TOFIs, thin outside, fat inside. And we have a video with Dr. Mario Kratz discussing how everybody has kind of a threshold on how much body fat you can store on your belly on the outside, below the skin. And then you have the other side of the equation. You have people who is big, and you can see that with people who do, what do you call that, Dr. Brewer? Those who are like Arnold Schwarzenegger, that building muscle for contests and stuff like that.
Bodybuilders,
The bodybuilders.
mesomorphs. Yeah.
Thank you. And also, if just you have seen a Mexican wrestler, those are
The lucheros,
luchadores. Yeah,
luchadores.
those guys do a lot of exercise. Believe me, it's not like they're on a coach just sitting down. But the diet is very high on carbs and even protein.
Mm.
So you will see that they have a lot of muscle, but they have a lot of fat below that muscle as well. So what's your goal? Where do you want to be? And that's what you need to think about whenever approaching any of those strategies. And you're gonna find 10,000 strategies to do this. Um, let's go to a short topic real quick. Do you want to give an introduction for this one, Dr. Brewer? Or do you want me to take it over?
We had a patient who said, who asked us the question, well, there, there's a lot of discussion and attention about having high cholesterol and a lot of focus in a lot of groups wanting to decrease it. And they saw an article that said berberine is a natural PCSK9. If you don't remember that, if that's, what is that word? It's the new anti cholesterol drugs. It's the biological drugs. When they came out, they cost what, 40,000 a year. Now they're down to a much, much more affordable level, and they're becoming something that's used on a regular basis. Repatha is one of the most common ones, and all of these are used in an injection form. So it's the new biomedical form of a cholesterol drug. Now, so here's the question. Can you take berberine instead, like that article said? So, Jesus, go ahead.
So, exactly right. This came out last year. And just two remarks, real quick remarks for you to get you into context. Berberine is a supplement that has become really popular. It's a quaternary ammonium salt derived from alkaloids. What does that mean? Basically, it's an organic compound that is based on nitrogen. And an alkaloid is basically a compound made of nitrogen that has effects on human physiology or even any animal physiology, and has been used in Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine and has some benefits. We know about the benefits of blood glucose and insulin and other stuff, and there is some truth to that conversation. There's research that's coming up and saying, hey, berberine might be impacting PCSK9. And a PCSK9 is a protein that is regulating LDL levels. The way it works basically is the higher the PCSK9 protein, the less LDL receptors in the liver. So LDL is just floating around. When you suppress PCSK9 protein function, you will have more LDL receptors available on the liver, so it can get rid of a lot of those LDL particles. And it's based on the idea that LDL or decreasing LDL along will decrease cardiovascular risk. I'm not going to go to that money hole right now, just trying to identify if berberine really does this on PCSK9s. Now, the research, as in a lot of research on supplements, it's scarce. There's not so much about it. There are multiple studies on mice, and that's where they saw that berberine does decrease PCSK9. There are some small studies on humans, small populations just yet. We're just getting there, and the evidence, it seems that it might be helping on that side. It might inhibit PCSK9 protein. It might decrease LDL. But the key word is might. So we still need to see more research and see how meaningful this is. At least on this specific article, the author said you can just combine. You can combine berberine with other strategies lifestyle, other supplements, other medications, and that might be the best use for berberine right now. I don't think it's going to be on the short term that we can say berberine can replace statins or other medications, but it doesn't seem to be harming either. That's a good side. It seems to be a safe supplement to consider.
Now, here's one of the questions: safety and magnitude of impact.
Seems to be pretty safe. I haven't seen significant issues with berberine just yet, or the research that you see on other supplements.
Yeah. How about magnitude of impact?
I'll say still in the works, maybe moderate at the best.
So,
but that's just my perspective, of course.
Half of what you see with Repatha? A tenth?
Oh, that's a good question. They did not specify on this specific research because the studies did not compare to Repatha. So I don't know.
Having looked at evidence on this, I would say way less than a tenth of what you see with Repatha, more like 100th. I mean, it's a pop gun compared to an elephant gun with Repatha, and that's why you see some of the focus that you see. So yeah, if you're interested in that, one of the things to understand is that PCSK9 is a much, much bigger process than people tend to think. It's the process associated with our liver keeping an eye out for LDL coming back or from peripheral areas in the bloodstream. And our liver actually has little hands or little receptors that look for LDL coming back. And it pulls that LDL down into the liver when it touches one. And once it gets it in the liver cell, it burns that LDL. That was why so LDL was or PCSK9 research and pharma development was the opposite of what they've ever done before. What they did in the past, big pharma, they would go to a place like the Amazon or Easter Islands, and they'll pull up a bunch of molds, plant-based materials, etc. Then they would take it back to the endless storage hallways of big pharma and start cataloging the impacts of these different compounds. Rapamycin was discovered exactly that way. Rapamycin was originally a compound that was scraped off of a rock in the Easter Islands. Where did the term rapamycin come from? Rapa Nui. In the local language, Rapa Nui was the name of those Eastern Islands. You may remember Easter Islands. It's the islands that have the huge stone heads. So rapamycin has been a big deal in medicine, and it was discovered that way. Now, what's that got to do with this? Again, the PCSK9s were discovered in exactly the opposite way. They started looking at humans and saying, well, we want to figure out a way to decrease LDL levels, LDL cholesterol. So instead of looking around at our catalogs of compounds that have been collected from all over the world, exotic places, let's do this differently. Let's go look at genetics. Let's start looking at human beings that might have very low levels. And sure enough, they found this teenager. It was a cheerleader in the state of Texas. She had a very, very low LDL level. What they began to find out as they studied her metabolism was she had a very, very active form of this process that we talked about. The liver reaching up, finding LDL in the blood, pulling it back down, and burning it. So they said, hey, if there's a way that we could impact that metabolism, maybe we can decrease LDL. Sure enough, you fast forward a few years and Repatha hits the market. So to say that, to think that these are natural PCSK9s, yes, that's true. But it's sort of a so what. yes, it works in the same function that so much of our LDL metabolism works. Um, does it have the same impact? Nowhere near the same order of magnitude. Anything else about berberine as a PCSK9?
No, but I'm gonna take your word for a quick segue.
Okay.
Speaking of Texas, speaking of
Oh,
Texas,
I forgot. I'm glad you didn't.
well, I didn't want folks to think, oh, this is just an advertisement for their event. We covered the main show,
But it
we
is.
provided the benefit, then a 30-second plug, and then we go to Q&A. So bear with me for a minute. We had an event on Tampa, Florida last year. It was a complete success. We were really happy about that. We joked a lot, but we also talked serious about heart disease, and we believe that we help a lot of folks. And now we want to repeat that in Dallas. So if you're nearby, or even if you're not nearby, you can take a plane and visit us at Dallas, Texas, April the 18th to the 20th. Call the office 859-721-1414. They'll get you hooked up. And this is not just a summit. This is not just a conference. If you're interested in getting a CIMT, carotid intima media thickness test, to see if you have any soft plaque, you can go get it there if this is something that you cannot get nearby. And you can also get to see us, Jeannie, Heather, and the team. And also, there's an option for getting lab work done. So after the event, you will get a visit with either Jeannie, Heather, or Dr. Brewer, and it's the full package. So to understand and see what else you can do on regards to your cardiovascular health. So again, Dallas, Texas, April the 18th to the 20th. Yes,
Um,
Dr. Brewer and I will be bantering a lot.
and this is for you folks who said, come out west, come out west, come out west. Well, that's where we're going, out west.
Sounds wonderful. Now let's go to the Q&A section then. So, first of all, um, I like I'm a little bit of a narcissistic, if you want to say it that way. Just a little bit,
You're
10%
the
maybe.
only human that I know that is.
You like that joke, didn't you? Just for context, I have heard Dr. Brewer making that joke for at least 10 times this week. It's a good one. Not getting old. Can can we show my picture, Gilbert? Um, so become a YouTube member. That's gonna be the easiest way for me to reach out to your question. See, CGHS 8KISS. Well, CG 8KISS. Become a new member. As well to Lokesh and Maureen 12178. We appreciate that. Thank you so much. It does make a difference. You can see that there's an icon next to the name of those who become a YouTube member, and that makes a difference in both us being able to reach out person. We have people. We have people working all over the world with us, and it makes it easier for me to identify some questions like Brad's question right here. He's saying, is it prudent to measure lipid markers like ApoB and metabolic markers like triglycerides, HDL, glucose, insulin, particle number, as small dense LDL, to get the most holistic picture of one's progression of cardiovascular disease? If I may, Dr. Brewer, I'll say yes and no. If we take a look at those markers, it's not so much about progression. For progression, we take a look at CIMT. But those are good markers to understand where you are on regards to metabolic health. So we take a look at those, not so much for progression, but to see where you are, and if there's something changing that needs to be adjusted. But if you want to find progression of plaque, that will be a CIMT. Dr. Brewer?
Yes. So the two most important tests we do are an OGTT with insulin survey and the lipid panel with fractionation. So, Brad, I've got a slightly different perspective on what you're talking about. I would say yes, but it doesn't include it includes a lot more than your typical doctor's evaluation. You know, most primary care docs, internists will just do a cholesterol panel. We do look at cholesterol panel. Triglyceride over HDL is important. We do look at ApoB. And Jesus has sort of touched on that little debate a couple of times. If you've heard it once, you maybe have heard it 1,000 times. It's all ApoB. It's all ApoB. We've had so many patients who were totally comfortable with sky high LDLs, and we were watching their ApoB. And then they heard some folks, Peter Attia and some others say, no, it's ApoB. And then just panicked. It may sound a little bit confusing, but here's the truth. I couldn't agree more with the statement that you hear from the lipidology community and Peter that ApoB is more important than LDL. And here's why. ApoB includes VLDL, that remnant cholesterol, that LDL version that's got a lot more triglyceride in it. Now, this may start to sound a little bit confusing and geeky. Maybe Jesus can translate for me when I get through. But the bottom line is, I do think ApoB is a better indicator than just LDL alone. But that's not what we look at. We look at triglyceride over HDL. We look at the health of your large, fluffy LDLs. We look at the entire population of LDLs that you have, not just the large, fluffy. We look at the small, dense. And we also, even more importantly, look at the entire population of your HDLs. The bottom line is, this is all about the impact of your metabolism on your cholesterol. What happens is, when our metabolism gets bad, that metabolism that I discussed in the intro, starting to get into prediabetes, diabetes, you start getting what starts off as an inability to burn carbs rapidly becomes an inability to burn both carbs and fats because of that high insulin level. So fat particles start replacing the cholesterol that's usually carried by large, fluffy HDL and LDL. When those fatty acid containing particles go through the liver burns them for energy. So what happens is you start losing your large, fluffy HDL, you start losing your large, fluffy LDL. And if you're following me, you may begin to get connecting a few dots here. The dots that, oh, no, it's small, dense LDL that really damages you. Well, maybe not. Maybe the problem is the small, dense LDLs are all that's left after your large, fluffy LDLs are getting chewed up. You may have heard that it's the large HDL that's very impactful, that saves you. Well, that may be true, but maybe it's really just that large LDL, or that HDL large, is more of a bioindicator. Maybe HDL large and LDL large particles are really more bioindicators. I realize I got real geeky. Jesus, any way to clean that up?
I don't know if that's a human way possible to clean that up. No, just one thing that I learned from Dr. Brewer, I can tell you that is, there are more places where you can store energy. Lipoproteins are one of those. So if you think about lipoprotein, David Feldman has two analogies: a boat or a pizza box. So lipoproteins come out from the liver in form of VLDL, IEDL, LDL, and all of those have triglycerides and cholesterol inside of them. And that's how you start burning all that stuff. Remnant cholesterol, which are the very low density and intermediate density just before becoming LDL, those usually get burned real quickly because they have a lot of triglycerides. So, on all this, does nuance on does size matter, does it not, what triggers inflammation, what it doesn't. We know they have a role, but as Dr. Burr said, we see them more like indicators. If there's one test that we take a look at, it's the oral glucose tolerance test with insulin response. That tells you a big picture of how you're able to metabolize glucose and energy. And I heard somebody said you can get the same information from A1C, fasting insulin, fasting glucose. I don't think you do. We have seen plenty of people with fasting insulin, fasting glucose, normal levels. They get challenged on an oral glucose tolerance test and insulin response, and yes, they have insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, or even full-blown diabetes with a normal fasting glucose. So I'll say that's another one of those that you want to get for metabolic health. Let's go there for another question from Brad. Diet, low carb diet, calorie deficit. Which calories matter? We do accept that. High satiety food, sleep, exercise. Basically summarizing the components. Sleep is a neglected issue. Stress is usually a neglected issue. So if you can add it, diet, exercise, and then you have those other two. If a person is carrying excess body weight for years, it's highly likely they are pre-diabetic or have insulin resistance. It's a good test, but the answer is always the same: diet, sleep, exercise, and stress reduction. I cannot agree more. And interrupt me any moment, Dr. Brewer.
I just did.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a lot of comments. For example, one of them was hit. That's all you ever hear about these days. Another one was, no, walking is better. So here's the thing. Here's what we're trying to deal with. For decades, everybody thought it was just jogging and or walking. In other words, light aerobics. And it's sort of like that level 2 exercise that's so popular these days. Level 2. Level 2 is important. Light aerobics are important. But here's the thing. It's not the only thing. And when you look at metabolism, you look at metabolic disease, there are a couple of other things that are very important and more effective at dealing with this. For example, if you go back to the old Mayo study where they actually did crossover, they looked at 20-somethings, 50-somethings, and 70 and 80-somethings. They did crossover exercises between HIIT, resistance training, and light aerobics. And then they actually did muscle biopsies to see who did the best. There was no question. The people that got the greatest improvement were the 70 and 80-somethings with HIIT training. So that made a couple of statements. Number one, yep, you're not too old in your 70s and 80s. Number two, it's not just light aerobics. You need to push that metabolism. You need to provide some stress to it. We realize that injury is a big deal. We're not saying go out and injure yourself, but we are reporting the evidence, reporting the facts. There's a couple of other things to think about. The next thing is, what else was better than light aerobics? Resistance training. So, number one, HIIT training. Number two, light resistance training. Now then you get a lot of discussions about, well, I've got injuries. I've got a bad knee. I've got a bad hip. Someone mentioned, well, I'm doing rope pulls because of my own, just because I need to, as opposed to running. Does that work? Absolutely. The best type of HIIT, if possible, is to get those large muscle groups. What we're looking for is change on our metabolism, not so much looking good. When you talk about resistance training, weights, most men especially start thinking about their arms. It's better if you can do legs because that's where the muscle mass is. That's where you're going to get more of an impact on your metabolism. But if you've got a disability, you've got a hip problem and you cannot run, you can't do squats or lunges, then yes, do what you can do. But again, get that, remember that you got to do some of that stressing to increase the metabolism, increase that mitochondrial mass. There was one fella, I can't remember right now, who said, look, I was in my 70s. I started doing walking, and now, very slowly, I got up to where I'm doing sprints. So go slow, but put it in your sights to get there.
I can tell you my experience when the first time I got into a gym and you see all these guys already worked up. You can get like there's an impact on your self-esteem on saying, well, look, if you compare myself to people who have been on the gym for 3, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, everybody has a point where you need to start or a point where you need to restart whatever you have done in the past. So it's your own journey. And I think that's important whenever you are thinking about exercise. Go to your own rhythm and you will get to your goal. And the next one is, I don't think we're at any moment beating up on those who say zone 2 is the best. I think zone 2 has a role. And we saw that on the research today. There was a moment where part of that HIIT training was having some percentage of time on zone 2. But it's as you go and cool down. So getting the higher heart rates, getting your muscle to start burning, even burning fat that it might have around the muscle cell, because that's another component. Your muscle needs to get rid of that fat as well. And as we will see with Sean O'Mara, the bigger the muscle on the abdomen, or the more mass, more than bigger, the more mass that you have a muscle compared to fat, that's going to make a big difference on your metabolism.
Do you mind if I make a comment about that question as well, Woody Woodrings?
I know you were going to.
I'm glad you knew it. So, Woody, I think there's a today versus the next 10 years kind of thing as well. For sure, there's no question level 2 burns more fat than the others today. But in terms of looking at burning fat a decade for the next decade, which would you rather have? Would you rather have higher mitochondrial mass or not? So that's my point. I think that, yes, if you look at today, there's no question in terms of the evidence, today's burn is going to be quicker with level 2. But if you're looking at burns on down the road, muscle metabolism is still very, very important.
Yep.
I'd like to switch for a second and respond to Carol Jean 6's comment.
Oh, there you go again.
I did it. Yes. You're the answer Nazi and I'm the answer freedomist, or whatever you call that.
I don't know what
liberation. The answer liberationist. So Carol Jean brought up a good point. I shattered my tibia, my tibial plateau. So it's hard to run after that. I can't run anymore. But I use an elliptical. So that's the thing. Kudos to you, Carol Jean 6. You're doing what a lot of folks need to think about. Well, I can't run anymore because of this injury or that, but I can figure something out. And yes, I can do ellipticals. So there's a lot more out there than most people give themselves credit for.
Yeah, I know people might get frustrated because they're like, just tell me what I need to do. But it's not that simple. Each person needs to find out what works better for them. The article should suggest that the elliptical for older people. So that's an option. Chris Linky, 62 years young, bad knees. I just a rope pull at the gym. 1 minute on, 30 seconds break for 15 minutes. Heart rate gets up to 160 or higher. Does that qualify as HIIT? I'll say so. What do you think?
I think so too. And anything, again, you get all these different, what exactly meets the criteria. I'm less concerned about what exactly meets the criteria for HIT and far more concerned about getting your metabolic rate up there, getting that heart rate up there. Now, that's a problem for people who are on beta blockers, but I'm not ready to go down that bunny hole yet. Are you?
No. I mean, everything counts, but the benefits are different. Brad, I started walking, took 3 years to steady strengthen my body in order to add intermittently jog until about 5 years, and I can sprint between my walking. We all must listen to our bodies, no injuries. That's good. And I think that's the whole point. If you want to go from 0 to 100, that's not going to work. But as you move on, you're going to realize you are more able and capable of doing the stuff that maybe you were not able to do 6 months ago. But I think the hardest step is the first one, to start. Once you get on a roll for a few months, it's downhill from there. And I'm sorry, this is Brad's show. He became a YouTube member. There's something.
Oh, there you
There's
go.
there's something that causes you to lose your breath: swimming, walking, stairs, rowing. What is rowing?
Rowing, rowing.
Rowing.
You know, have you like rowing in a boat? Row your boat.
Oh, okay, okay.
A Concept 2 rower. Somebody else was talking about that. It's built for, you have some that have blades that push against air and some that have blades that push against water. I do some rehit a couple times a week using a Concept 2 rower. I do some other types of hit as well. I use a Schwinn Airdyne, which is it's sort of well, I'm talking about me. Let me back up. Why don't you talk about Brad's comment?
No, I think that's a good option because I was also was gonna add. I know that you are a big fan of rocking.
Rocking?
Not like going to concerts. I know you can spend some energy in those as well, but can you explain rocking?
Uh, yes, rucking is a big deal. It's where you walk. You may have heard this. A lot of people are like myself, kind of old that watch this channel, and you may remember that song, "Fall de re, fall de la." What the rucksack on my back? A rucksack is. I won't sing anymore. A rucksack is a backpack that has weight in it. I don't use a rucksack. I use a weight vest. I've got a 40-pound weight vest uh, right over in the corner, and I'll go out and walk around the lake, walk up and down the hills, and that's a big deal. It really makes a difference, especially um, for those people that have lost 30 or 40 pounds. When they go back and they try a rucksack, they really get a big, or a weight vest, they get a big epiphany moment. They think, oh my gosh, I did lose a lot of muscle in my legs when I lost this 30 pounds. And now I know why. It was heavy carrying all that weight. So I'm sorry. You took me down one bunny hole and I went down another. But
We start
rucking is a, go
we
ahead.
s- we started talking belly fat and we end up singing. How that happened?
I wasn't singing. Anyway, rucking is weight vest. It's very, very good exercise.
Yeah. And again, it makes the point. You need to find what. How do you say that? What's your? It's not mojo. How do you say that? What's your?
Passion?
Yeah, whatever works for you. There's a
What works
slang
for
term
you?
for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We might want to wrap it up. Woody Woodring, question about how much carbs one should eat. If the OGTT test uses 75 grams of sugar in the test, it seems that if you eat less than 75 grams per meal, you will get a similar result with the CGM. Good question, Dr. Brewer.
It may be a good question. I'm not sure I understand what he's saying. Is he saying, look, if you spike up to 180 with an OGTT, then you shouldn't eat 75 grams in a meal?
I think he's saying something like that, like you should eat less than 75 grams per meal.
Well, I agree with that. I don't recommend anybody gets up into that. That's 200. That's over 200. If you're eating 3 meals, that's over 200 grams per day of carbs. And I don't think that's healthy for most people at all.
Now there's some nuance to that as well. Nuance is the word of the day for me. 75 grams, that is dextrose, which is kind of equal to sugar table. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Brewer. Will spike the blood sugar real quick. So
Yes.
there's a difference between glycemic carb versus non-glycemic carbs. That's another discussion. I don't like that term that much. Dr. Brewer knows this because you can have a table and seeing, oh, this food source is gonna raise your sugar more than the other one, but then you compare that to different people, that it's actually different depending the person. So I don't know how reliable is that glycemic index, but there's some validity to that. There are some foods that are more likely to spike your blood sugar than others. So it's not just about the grams; it's about what type of carbs you're eating.
Yeah. So David Meintz is on. He's watching. He's made a few comments, and
Oh,
David is a trained nutritionist, and he and I had that discussion once at one of his events where, um, you know, so I get it that this whole thing, glycemic index, has a lot of problems to it. But when you get very basic with it, it does make sense. For example, if you get 75 grams of quote carbs from cauliflower, that's not really going to cause you much of a blood sugar problem. It's just not. And so, because most of the grams of carbs in a cauliflower are going to be associated with fiber. So,
but bottom line, quick answer to that question: less than 100 carbs a day. Some resources say, some evidence say that low carb is less than 130 grams of carbs a day. So it depends on where you look for, but we recommend less than 100 grams of glycemic carbs a day. So vegetables, cruciferous, all that stuff doesn't count because those don't raise your blood sugar.
and if you
Uh,
look at it, most of our folks are actually below that. You know, if you start
yeah,
with 100 grams of carbs, glycemic carbs, and then you start saying, okay, well, you know what? 50 of those is a white bread sandwich that I eat for lunch. I don't need that white bread, and you exchange that out for something else, and not whole wheat bread, but maybe
sprouted.
sprouted bread, or no bread at all. Then
Yeah,
again, as people begin to continue down that process, they end up usually eating less than 100 grams of glycemic carbs a day anyway.
yep. Cindy Levick just became a member. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy.
A special thanks to David who's watching the show, and I I think I think we covered most of that. I'm sorry if I missed some of. Oh, this one we can live with this one. Chris Linky, can taking certain supplements cause errors in blood tests?
You looking at me or you looking at you? C, vitamin
I
C.
have my computer here, my camera here, so I'm looking
Okay,
at you, but you can look at me. I'm trying to give you some signals with the eyes and see
I
if you
see
have
it.
anything else than vitamin C.
Vitamins. Well, other than vitamin C,
Yeah, I don't
vitamin
know.
C is the big one. No, I don't have
I
any
think it is
bad
one.
other than vitamin C. Vitamin C can really mess up any kind of blood sugar testing. So be careful with that, especially if you're taking over a gram of vitamin C a day.
Yeah, and also if you're using a CGM, which correlates with the previous question about how many grams. So it's less than 100 plus a glucometer or a continuous glucose monitoring device, and a vitamin C can mess up those readings.
Well, Jesus, I don't think we're going to get 39 million views from our uh,
Yeah,
how
we
to
we
how
should
to
have.
drop your belly fat video.
I should have done something more clickbaity or spammy. I'm sorry.
I, I think our
Uh,
viewers are smarter than that.
the
Maybe.
two of us always trying to provide quality content. Gosh. Well,
Thank you very much for your interest.
see you next week.